The following podcast contains mature subject matter, adult themes, and may also contain profanity. You have been warned.
Hello, Absurdians. Hello. Welcome back to the show. I hope you're all doing real well, and it is a true joy to have you with us today. I say us, but it's just me, yours truly, Rod. Mel is not here. She is, if not today, very soon winging her way off to Newfoundland. I said it like that for her benefit. Proper pronunciation, of course, is Newfoundland. That is where her parents are. So she is going out to visit them and the rest of her family. Not the rest, but other members of her family. Yeah. Not going to regale you with what I did on the weekend because there really wasn't much of anything. So who cares? A little bit of business. I want to thank my nephew Ryan, who is at present in Scotland. For those of you who follow us on our socials, you may have seen a photo wherein one of our show stickers was affixed to a lamppost in Edinburgh. Edinburgh is a wonderful city. I have not been there for about 20 years, but I was there a couple of times, and I can attest to its wonderfulness. And if you ever have the opportunity to visit, I strongly encourage you to do so. I have 3 stories today. First one is quite long, but I hope you find it engaging. It is about a serious, dare I say, conspiracy theory that really began in the 1970s, and really exploded in the early 80s and progressed on well into the 90s, and in fact is still with us today, albeit in a slightly morphed version of itself. So, without further ado, let's get into it, shall we? Topic of this story is the Satanic Panic. I know some of you have heard of that. I know many of you were around during that time. I know I certainly was. So let's get into it, shall we? The Satanic Panic is a moral panic consisting of over 12,000 unsubstantiated cases of satanic ritual abuse, otherwise known as SRA, sometimes known as ritual abuse, starting in North America in the early 1980s and spreading throughout many parts of the world by the late 1990s. The panic originated in 1980 with the publication of Michelle Remembers, a book co-written by Canadian psychiatrist Lawrence Pasder and his patient and future wife, Michelle Smith, which used the now discredited practice of recovered memory therapy to make claims about satanic ritual abuse involving Michelle Smith. The allegations, which arose afterward throughout much of the United States, involved reports of physical and sexual abuse of people in the context of occult or satanic rituals. Some allegations involve a conspiracy of a global satanic cult that includes the wealthy and elite, in which children are abducted or bred for human sacrifice, pornography, and prostitution. Nearly every aspect of the ritual abuse is controversial, including its definition, the source of the allegations and proof thereof, testimonies of alleged victims, and court cases and criminal investigations involving the allegations. The panic affected lawyers, therapists, and social workers who handled allegations of child sexual abuse. Allegations initially brought together widely dissimilar groups, including religious fundamentalists, police investigators, child advocates, therapists, and clients in psychotherapy. The term satanic abuse was more common early on, which later became satanic ritual abuse and further secularized into simply ritual abuse. Over time, the accusations became more closely associated with dissociative identity disorder, then called multiple personality disorder, and anti-government conspiracy theories such as QAnon. Initial interest arose via the publicity campaign for Pazder's 1980 book Michelle Remembers, and it was sustained and popularized throughout the decade by coverage of the McMartin preschool trial. We'll get to that a little bit. Testimonials, symptom lists, rumors, and techniques to investigate or uncover memories of SRA were disseminated through professional, popular, and religious conferences, as well as through talk shows, sustaining and further spreading the moral panic throughout the United States and beyond. In some cases, allegations resulted in criminal trials with varying results. After 7 years in court, the McMartin trial resulted in no convictions for any of the accused, while other cases resulted in lengthy sentences, some of which were later reversed. Scholarly research eventually resulted in the conclusion that the phenomenon was a moral panic which, as one researcher put it in 2017, quote, involved hundreds of accusations that devil-worshipping pedophiles were operating America's white middle-class suburban daycare centers. A 1994 article in the New York Times stated that, quote, of the more than 12,000 documented accusations nationwide, investigating police were not able to substantiate any allegations of organized cult abuse. Now, where did this all start? What did it all begin with? Well, among the explanations of why the panic occurred when it did, or took the shape that it did, they include 3 films that opened and ran near the beginning of the panic pertained to Satanism, namely Rosemary's Baby in 1968, great movie, The Exorcist, 1973, fantastic movie, and The Omen in 1976. I have seen that, but not for a very long time, and it's actually on my watch list to see again soon. According to scholar Joseph Laycock, patients hypnotized by therapists to recover memories of SRA often seem to be recalling scenes from these films. Another origin is the reaction against the surge of new religious movements in the 1960s, due to both the immigration reform allowing missionaries for Asian religions, as well as new religions, including the Church of Satan, arising from the counterculture of the baby boomer generation, sometimes called the cult wars or cult scare. I'd like to point out here too that Church of Satan, Satanists if you will, do not believe in Satan. They don't believe he exists. They certainly do not worship Satan. Satan is a Judeo-Christian entity. Satanists are atheists. I don't know why they well, I do have an idea as to why they chose the Satan as their central figure. It's because he was a rebel, because he went against authority. Beyond that, they put nothing into Satanism regarding Satan. Another facet of the origin was the Tate LaBianca murders committed by cult members in the Manson family, which consisted of mostly lonely teenagers from broken homes. And lastly, Mike Warnick's best-selling 1972 memoir, The Satan Seller, in which he claimed to have led a group of 1,500 Satanists that engaged in rape and human sacrifice before he converted to evangelical Christianity. The book was praised by Moody Monthly and the Christian Century. 2 decades later, the book was debunked by an evangelical magazine called Cornerstone. Now, there is early history to all this. Let's have a quick look at that, shall we? Blood libel accusations against Jews are considered historical precursors of the modern moral panic. Allegations of horrific acts by outside groups, including cannibalism, child murder, torture, and incestuous orgies, can place minorities in the role of the other or outsider, as well as create a scapegoat for complex problems in times of social disruption. The Satanic ritual abuse panic repeated many of the features of historical moral panics and conspiracy theories, such as the blood libel against Jews by Appian in the 30s current era. The wild rumors that led to the persecution of early Christians in the Roman Empire, later allegations of Jewish rituals involving the cannibalism of Christian babies and desecration of the Eucharist, and the witch hunts of the 16th and 17th centuries. Torture and imprisonment were used by authority figures in order to coerce confessions from alleged Satanists, confessions that were later used to justify their executions. Records of these older allegations were linked by contemporary proponents in an effort to demonstrate that contemporary satanic cults were part of an ancient conspiracy of evil, though ultimately no evidence of devil-worshipping cults existed in Europe at any time in its history. In early modern Europe, people accused of being witches were stated to be working for Satan and burned at the stake. A more immediate precedent to the context of satanic ritual abuse in the United States was McCarthyism in the 1950s. Now, for those of you who may not be aware, McCarthyism, this is a very simple definition, was an extremely paranoid conspiracy that the U.S. was being overrun by communists. This probably began decades before the war, probably after the Russian Revolution and the beginning of the Soviet Union, but it exists today. Look how many people on the right, that is the right wing, will use the word communist as if it's an insult. And given their use of the word in the contexts that they present, they clearly know nothing as to what communism actually is. I would make the argument, and I can back it up, I think, that there has never been a communist country on Earth. Certainly not in modern history. Probably the closest thing would have been hunter-gatherer societies. But as a result of this McCarthyism, led by a senator, I believe it was Eugene McCarthy, many careers, especially in Hollywood, were destroyed. Lots of actors and directors and writers were blacklisted, not to ever work again. And worse things happened too. Of course, some of that led to suicides, So the underpinnings for the contemporary moral panic were found in a rise of 5 factors in the years leading up to the 1980s. 1. The establishment of fundamentalist Christianity and the founding and political activism of the religious organization which was named the Moral Majority. 2. The rise of the anti-cult movement, which accused abusive cults of kidnapping and brainwashing children and teens. 3. The appearance of the Church of Satan and other explicitly satanic groups, which added a kernel of truth to the existence of satanic cults. 4. The development of the social work or child protection field, and its struggle to have child sexual abuse recognized as a social problem and a serious crime. And lastly, the popularization of post-traumatic stress disorder, repressed memory, and the corresponding survivor movement. Now, the last one's a good thing. Well, the last 2 are good things. Child protection should happen. Social work should happen. Child sexual abuse is repugnant and obscene and should be looked at. But these were considered sometimes invasive to the family unit. It wasn't meaning that people who opposed them were pro-child sexual abuse, but keep the government out. You don't snoop in our affairs. I'm not sure why I put that accent on it, but I think it works. And, the diagnosis of PTSD is also really good. It used to be called shell shock, for God's sakes. Now we understand it a little better, and we recognize the rights and the importance of survivors. Now, Michelle Remembers, the book I mentioned earlier, now discredited, was written in the form of an autobiography, presenting the first modern claim that child abuse was linked to satanic rituals. According to the memoir, at the age of 5, Michelle was tortured by her mother for days in, quote, elaborate satanic rituals. As the torture reached a climax, a portal to hell opened, and Satan himself appeared, only to be driven away by the Virgin Mary and Archangel Michael. Explanations for lack of any evidence of abuse on Michelle's body were that it had been miraculously removed by St. Mary. Not explained was testimony from Michelle's father and 2 sisters contradicting the memoir, as well as a yearbook photo taken in November 1955 showing Michelle attending school and appearing healthy, when, according to Pazder's book, Michelle spent that month imprisoned in a basement. Pazder was also responsible for coining the term ritual abuse. Michelle Remembers provided a model for numerous allegations of SRA that ensued later in the same decade. On the basis of the book's success, Pazder developed a high media profile, gave lectures and training on SRA to law enforcement, and by September 1990 had acted as a consultant on more than 1,000 satanic ritual abuse cases, including the McMartin preschool trial, which we will get to. Prosecutors used Michelle Remembers as a guide when preparing cases against alleged Satanists. Michelle Remembers, along with other accounts portrayed as survivor stories, are suspected to have influenced later allegations of SRA, and the book has been suggested as a causal factor in the later epidemic of SRA allegations. The early 1980s, during the implementation of mandatory reporting laws, saw a large increase in child protection investigations in Canada, United States, United Kingdom, and other developed countries, along with a heightened public awareness of child abuse. The investigation of incest allegations in California was also changed, with cases led by social workers who used leading and coercive interviewing techniques that had been avoided by police investigators. Such changes in the prosecution of cases of alleged incest resulted in an increase in confessions by fathers in exchange for plea bargains. So what that means is, certainly some of these men, some of these fathers were guilty, no question, but these improper interviewing techniques put these men in a situation where they had no choice, guilty or not, especially not, to take a plea bargain. It was the only option, which means a number of these men were innocent, yet still charged, convicted, and imprisoned. Shortly thereafter, some children in child protection cases began making allegations of horrific physical and sexual abuse by caregivers within organized rituals, claiming sexual abuse in satanic rituals and the use of satanic symbols. These cases garnered the label satanic ritual abuse, both in the media and among professionals. Childhood memories of similar abuse began to appear in the psychotherapy sessions of adults. In 1983, charges were laid in the McMartin preschool trial, a major case in California which received attention throughout the United States and contained allegations of satanic ritual abuse. The case caused tremendous polarization in how to interpret the available evidence. Shortly afterward, more than 100 preschools across the country became the subject of similar sensationalist allegations, which were eagerly and uncritically reported by the press. Throughout the McMartin trial, media coverage of the defendants, Peggy McMartin and Ray Buckey, was unrelentingly negative, focusing only on statements by the prosecution. Michelle Smith and other alleged survivors met with parents involved in the trial, and it is believed that they influenced testimony against the accused. Key McFarland, a social worker employed by the Children's Institute International, developed a new way to interrogate children with anatomically correct dolls and used them in an effort to assist disclosures of abuse with the McMartin children. After asking the children to point to the places on the dolls where they had allegedly been touched and asking leading questions, McFarland diagnosed sexual abuse in virtually all the McMartin children. She coerced disclosures by using lengthy interviews that rewarded discussions of abuse and punished denials. The trial testimony that resulted from such methods was often contradictory and vague on all details except for the assertion that the abuse had occurred. Although the initial charges in the McMartin case featured allegations of satanic abuse and a vast conspiracy, these features were dropped relatively early in the trial, and prosecution continued only for non-ritual allegations of child abuse against only 2 defendants. After 3 years of testimony, McMartin and Buckey were acquitted on 52 of 65 counts, and the jury was deadlocked on the remaining 13 charges against Buckey, with 11 out of 13 jurors choosing not guilty. Buckey was recharged and 2 years later released without conviction. Now, where did all this begin? What is the origins of all these rumors of allegations, or allegations of all this horrific satanic abuse? Well, information about satanic ritual abuse claims spread through conferences presented to religious groups, churches, and professionals such as police forces and therapists, as well as parents. These conferences and presentations serve to organize agencies and foster communication between groups, maintaining and spreading disproven or exaggerated stories as fact. Members of local police forces organized into loose networks focused on cult crimes, some of whom billed themselves as experts and were paid to speak at conferences throughout the U.S. Religious revivalists also took advantage of the rumors and preached about the dangers of Satanism to youth and presented themselves at paid engagements as secular experts. At the height of the panic, the highly emotional accusations and circumstances of SRA allegations made it difficult to investigate the claims, with the accused being assumed as guilty and skeptics becoming co-accused during trials, and trials moving forward based solely on the testimonies of very young children without corroborating evidence. No forensic or corroborating evidence has ever been found for religiously based cannibalistic or murderous SRA, despite extensive investigations. The concern and reaction expressed by various groups regarding the seriousness or threat of SRA has been considered out of proportion to the actual threat by satanically motivated crimes, and the rare crime that exists may be labeled satanic does not equate to the existence of a conspiracy or network of religiously motivated child abusers. Now, as throughout all times in history, conspiracy theories abound, and there are obviously some at play here. So let's have a quick look at that, shall we? In 1984, McFarland warned a congressional committee that children were being forced to engage in scatological behavior and watch bizarre rituals in which animals were being slaughtered. In case I need to say, scatological refers to poop. You heard me. Shortly after, the United States Congress doubled its budget for child protection programs. Psychiatrist Roland Summit delivered conferences in the wake of the McMartin trial and depicted the phenomenon as a conspiracy that involved anyone skeptical of the phenomenon. So if you question this, you're guilty. You're a Satanist raping children. Jesus, what buffoonery. By 1986, social worker Carol Darling argued to a grand jury that the conspiracy reached the government. Her husband, Brad Darling, gave conference presentations about a satanic conspiracy of great antiquity, which he now believed was permeating American communities. In 1985, Patricia Pulling joined forces with psychiatrist Thomas Radecki, director of the National Coalition on Television Violence, to create BADD. B-A-D-D stands for Bothered About Dungeons and Dragons. I'm sure you're all familiar with that. Pulling and BADD saw role-playing games generally, and Dungeons and Dragons specifically, as satanic cult recruitment tools, inducing youth to suicide, murder, and satanic ritual abuse. Other alleged recruitment tools included heavy metal music, educators, child care centers, and television. This information was shared at policing and public awareness seminars on crime and the occult, sometimes by active police officers. None of these allegations held up in analysis or in court. In fact, analysis of youth suicide over the period in question found that players of role-playing games actually had a much lower rate of suicide than the average. Among the conspiracy theories alleged by the Panic were that thousands of people a year were being killed by a network of Satanists, what one psychiatrist writing in a psychiatric journal called a hidden Holocaust. You ever get the sense that most of these people are just grabbing at fame? Money as well? God damn it. Gotta hate greed and personal self-absorption, destroying lives in the process. Explanations for how Satanists covered up this slaughter included their infiltrating media and law enforcement, as well as mortician and crematorium operators to make sure no bodies were ever found. Other versions claim that there were no missing persons because Satanists used certain women as breeders, providing Satanists with thousands of babies for human sacrifice. By the late 1980s, therapists or patients who believed someone had suffered from SRA could suggest solutions that included Christian psychotherapy, exorcism, and support groups whose members self-identified as, quote, anti-satanic warriors. Federal funding was increased for research on child abuse, with large portions of the funding allocated for research on child sexual abuse. Funding was also provided for conferences supporting the idea of SRA, adding a veneer of respectability to the idea, as well as offering an opportunity for prosecutors to exchange advice on how to best secure convictions, with tactics including destructions of notes, refusing to tape interviews with children, and destroying or refusing to share evidence with the defense. Had proof been found, SRA would have represented the first occasion where an organized and secret criminal activity had been discovered by mental health professionals. In 1987, Geraldo Rivera produced a national television special on the alleged secret cults, claiming, quote, estimates are that there are over 1 million Satanists in the United States, and they are linked in a highly organized, secretive network, end quote. Tapings of this and similar talk show episodes were subsequently used by religious fundamentalists, psychotherapists, social workers, and police to promote the idea that a conspiracy of satanic cults existed, and that these cults were committing serious crimes. In the 1990s, psychologist D. Corydon Hammond published a detailed theory of ritual abuse drawn from hypnotherapy sessions with his patients, alleging they were victims of a worldwide conspiracy of organized, secretive clandestine cells who used torture, mind control, and ritual abuse to create alternate personalities that could be activated with code words. The victims were allegedly trained as assassins, prostitutes, drug traffickers, and child sex workers to create child pornography. Hammond claimed his patients had revealed the conspiracy was masterminded by a Jewish doctor in Nazi Germany, but who now worked for, of course, the Central Intelligence Agency, with a goal of worldwide domination by a satanic cult. The cult was allegedly composed of respectable, powerful members of society who used the funds generated to further their agenda. Missing memories among the victims and absence of evidence was cited as evidence of the power and effectiveness of this cult in furthering its agenda. So the lack of evidence was evidence. Hard to wait a little on that one. Hammond's claims gained considerable attention due in part to his prominence in the field of hypnosis and psychotherapy. But, Rod, you say, surely there must have been some evidence of this ritual abuse, this satanic ritual abuse. Well, let's just see. How about that, okay? The National Center on Child Abuse and Neglect conducted a study led by University of California psychologist Gail Goodman, which found that among 12,000 accusations of ritual or religious-linked abuse, there was no evidence for a well-organized intergenerational satanic cult who sexually molested and tortured children, although there was convincing evidence of lone perpetrators or couples who say they are involved with Satan or use the claim to intimidate victims. One such case Goodman studied involved grandparents who had black robes, candles, and Christ on an inverted crucifix, and the children had chlamydia, a sexually transmitted disease, in their throats, according to the report by a district attorney. The evidence for SRA was primarily in the form of testimonies from children who made allegations of SRA and adults who claimed to remember abuse during childhood that may have been forgotten and recovered during therapy. With both children and adults, no corroborating evidence has been found for anything except pseudo-Satanism, in which the satanic and ritual aspects were secondary to and used as a cover for sexual abuse. Despite this lack of objective evidence, and aided by the competing definitions of what SRA actually was, proponents claimed SRA was a real phenomenon throughout the peak and during the decline of the moral panic. Despite allegations appearing in the United States, Netherlands, Sweden, New Zealand, and Australia, no material evidence has been found to corroborate allegations of organized cult-based abuse that practice human sacrifice and cannibalism. Though trauma specialists frequently claimed the allegations made by children and adults were the same, in reality the statements made by adults were more elaborate, severe, and featured more bizarre abuse. In 95% of the adult cases, the memories of the abuse were recovered during psychotherapy. Now we'll take a look at a couple of court cases. We've already talked about the McMartin preschool case, which was, to my knowledge and memory anyway, the most significant and attention-getting, media-getting case to come out of all this, but there were certainly others. Allegations of SRA have appeared throughout the world. In 1984, a large-scale investigation and prosecution of ritual abuse in Jordan, Minnesota, drew national attention for poor investigative and prosecutorial practices. A group of parents named Victims of Child Abuse Laws grew and gained political power. The testimony of children in these cases may have led to their collapse, as juries came to believe that the sources of the allegations were the use of suggestive and manipulative interviewing techniques rather than actual events. Research since that time has supported these concerns, and without the use of these techniques, it is unlikely the cases would have reached trial. In one analysis of 36 court cases involving sexual abuse of children within rituals, only 1/4 resulted in convictions, all of which had little to do with ritual sexual abuse. In a survey of more than 11,000 psychiatric and police workers throughout the U.S., conducted for the National Center on Child Abuse and Neglect, researchers investigated approximately 12,000 accusations of ritual or religious abuse between 1980 and 1990. The survey found no substantiated reports of well-organized satanic rings of people who sexually abused children, but did find incidences in which the ritualistic aspects were secondary to the abuse and were used to intimidate victims. Victor reviewed 21 court cases alleging SRA between 1983 and 1987, in which no prosecutions were obtained for ritual abuse. During the early 1980s, some courts attempted ad hoc accommodations to address the anxieties of child witness in relation to testifying before defendants. Screens or closed-circuit television technology are a common feature of child sexual assault trials today. Children in the early 80s were typically forced into direct visual contact with the accused abuser while in court. SRA allegations in the courts catalyzed a broad agenda of research into the nature of children's testimony and the reliability of their oral evidence in court. Ultimately, in SRA cases, the coercive techniques used by believing district attorneys, therapists, and police officers were critical in establishing and often resolving SRA cases. In courts, when juries were able to see recordings or transcripts of interviews with children, the alleged abusers were acquitted. The reaction by successful prosecutors spread throughout conventions and conferences on SRA was to destroy or fail to take notes of the interview in the first place. One group of researchers concluded that children usually lacked a sufficient amount of explicit knowledge of satanic ritual abuse to fabricate all of the details of an SRA claim on their own. However, the same researchers also concluded that children usually have the sufficient amount of general knowledge of, quote, violence and the occult to serve as a starting point from which ritual claims could develop. In 2006, psychologist and attorney Christopher Barden drafted a brief to the Supreme Court of California, signed by nearly 100 international experts in the field of human memory, emphasizing the lack of credible scientific support for repressed and recovered memories. So that's one thing we're going to look at here next, but another one, and these two things are integral, they're vital, well, you know what integral means, to this whole thing. Maybe even the well-meaning among them. This is, psychology and psychiatry, they're pretty young fields of medicine. And we're certainly not there yet with all the answers, by no means. While we were even less there 40 years ago. So let's look at a couple of these things. So we're first going to look at dissociative identity disorder. You may, if you're old enough, you would have heard the term split personality. Well, we don't use that term anymore because it's ridiculous. But that's what this means. SRA has been linked to dissociative identity disorder, DID, formerly known as multiple personality disorder, with some DID patients also alleging cult abuse. The first person to write a first-person narrative about SRA was Michelle Smith, co-author of Michelle Remembers, Smith was diagnosed with DID by her therapist and later husband, and co-writer of the book, Lawrence Pasdar. According to Pasdar's then-wife, Pasdar saw the television film based on the later discredited book Sybil, about a woman with multiple personality disorder, and said that he had a similar patient. This was the initial seed of the story that became Michelle Remembers. Now, some of you will know of the film and or the book Sybil, that's spelled Sybil. I don't think I've ever seen it. I have certainly heard of it, and I believe it came out early 70s, late 60s perhaps. I don't recall, but somewhere in that area. Scientists involved with the then called International Society for the Study of Multiple Personality and Dissociation, especially Associate Editor Bennett G. Braun, uncritically promoted the idea that actual groups of persons who worship Satan were abusing and ritually sacrificing children, and furthermore that thousands of persons were recovering actual memories of such abuse during therapy, openly discussing such claims in the organization's journal Dissociation. So he bought these allegations, these claims of repressed memories of all this abuse without even looking at it. Uncritically is the verb here. What the hell, dude? You're a scientist. That's not what science does. Science doesn't look for the answer. It looks for an answer, and it looks to disprove that. Constantly moving forward. Failing to prove something is a good scientific step. That means you're on the path. You haven't got there yet, but it's the path that matters. This mental acorn couldn't come up with that. He couldn't even figure it out. What a loser. Anyway, rant over. In a 1989 editorial, Dissociation Editor-in-Chief Richard Kluft likened clinicians who did not speak of their patients with recovered memories of SRA to the good Germans during the Holocaust. Wow. One particularly controversial article found parallels between SRA accounts and pre-Inquisition historical records of Satanism, hence claimed to find support for the existence of ancient and intergenerational satanic cults. A review of these claims by sociologist Mary DeYoung in a 1994 Behavioral Sciences and the Law article noted that the historical basis for these claims, and in particular their continuity of cults, ceremonies, and rituals, was questionable. However, at an ISSTD conference in November 1990, psychiatrist and researcher Frank Putnam, then chief of the Dissociative Disorders Unit of the National Institute of Mental Health in Maryland, led a plenary session panel that proved to be the first public presentation of psychiatric, historical, and law enforcement skepticism concerning SRA claims. Other members of the panel included psychiatrist George Ganaway, anthropologist Cheryl Mulhern, and psychologist Richard Null. Putnam, a skeptic, was viewed by SRA advocates in attendance as using fellow skeptics, such as Null and Mulhern, as allies in a disinformation campaign to split the SRA-believing community. So these idiots are claiming that these scientists, anthropologists, psychiatrists, are, well, they didn't say they're in league with the Satanists, but they are suggesting that they're trying to disprove it. Which they were, because they're skeptics, and they were bloody well right to be skeptics. I hope a lot of the people who bought into this shit lost their careers. I hope they're now, down in a couple of Whoppers at the local Burger King. A survey of 12,000 cases of alleged ritual or religious abuse found that most were diagnosed with DID, as well as post-traumatic stress disorder. The level of dissociation in a sample of women alleging SRA was found to be higher than a comparable sample of non-SRA peers, approaching the levels shown by patients diagnosed with DID. A sample of patients diagnosed with DID and reporting childhood SRA also present other symptoms, including, quote, dissociative states with satanic overtones, severe post-traumatic stress disorder, survivor guilt, bizarre self-abuse, unusual fears, sexualization of sadistic impulses, indoctrinated beliefs, and substance abuse. Commenting on the study, Philip Kuhn stated that patients were held together in a ward dedicated to dissociative disorders with ample opportunity to socialize, and that the memories were recovered through the use of hypnosis, which he considered questionable. No cases were referred to law enforcement for verification, nor was verification attempted through family members. Coons also pointed out that existing injuries could have been self-inflicted, that the experiences reported were strikingly similar, and that many of the SRA reports developed while patients were hospitalized. The reliability of memories of DID clients who alleged SRA in treatment has been questioned and a point of contention in the popular media and with clinicians. Many of the allegations made are fundamentally impossible, and alleged survivors lack the physical scars that would result were their allegations true. Many women claiming to be SRA survivors have been diagnosed with DID, and it is unclear if their claims of childhood abuse are accurate or a manifestation of their diagnosis. Of a sample of 29 patients who presented with SRA, 22 were diagnosed with dissociative disorders, including DID. The authors noted that 58% of the SRA claims appeared in the years following the Geraldo Rivera special on SRA, and a further 34% following a workshop on SRA presented in the area. In only 2 patients were the memories elicited without the use of questionable therapeutic practices for memory retrieval. Claims of SRA by DID patients have been called, quote, often nothing more than fantastic pseudo-memories implanted or reinforced in psychotherapy, and SRA a cultural script of the perception of DID. Some believe that memories of SRA are solely iatrogenically implanted memories from suggestive therapeutic techniques, though this has been criticized by Daniel Brown, Alan Shefflin, and Corydon Hammond for what they argue as overreaching the scientific data that supports an iatrogenic theory. I did have to look this up. I will not lie. Iatrogenic means an injury, a disease, a condition caused by medical treatment, including psychotherapy. So in other words, it's a result of treatment rather than something prior to that treatment. Others have criticized Hammond specifically for using therapeutic techniques to gather information from clients that relies solely on information fed by the therapist in a manner that highly suggests iatrogenesis. Skeptics that said that the increase in DID diagnosis in the 1980s and 90s and its association with memories of SRA is evidence of malpractice by treating professionals. Much of the body of literature on the treatment of ritually abused patients focuses on dissociative disorders. Now, last thing, we've heard a lot about, and I think we've all heard about memory recovery, forgetting something because it's so traumatic. And through treatment, they excise, they bring out that memory so that, the patient and the psychiatrist are able to learn about it, are able to hear it. Well, we'll see about that. One explanation for the SRA allegations is that they were based upon false memories caused by use of discredited suggestive techniques such as hypnosis and leading questions by therapists underestimating the suggestibility of their clients. The altered state of consciousness induced by hypnosis rendered patients an unusual ability to produce confabulations, often with the assistance of their therapists. Paul R. McHugh, professor of psychiatry at Johns Hopkins University, discusses in his book Try to Remember the developments that led to the creation of false memories in the SRA moral panic, and the formation of the false memories as an effort to bring contemporary scientific research and political action to the polarizing struggle about false memories within the mental health disciplines. According to McHugh, there is no coherent scientific basis for the core belief of one side of the struggle, that sexual abuse can cause massive systemic repression of memories that can only be accessed through hypnosis, coercive interviews, and other dubious techniques. The group of psychiatrists who promoted these ideas, whom McHugh terms Mannerist Freudians, consistently followed a deductive approach to diagnosis in which the theory and causal explanation of symptoms was assumed to be childhood sexual abuse leading to dissociation, followed by a set of unproven and unreliable treatments with a strong confirmation bias that inevitably produced the allegations and causes that were assumed to be there. The illogic is painful. This would never happen on the planet Vulcan. The treatment approach involved isolation. Okay, now listen to this. I'm going to start this over. This is good. This is ridiculous. The treatment approach involved isolation of the patient from friends and family within psychiatric wards dedicated to the treatment of dissociation, filled with other patients who were treated by the same doctors with the same flawed methods, and staff members who also coherently and universally ascribed to the same set of beliefs. These methods began in the 1980s and continued for several years until a series of court cases and medical malpractice lawsuits resulted in hospitals failing to support the approach. So let's pause there for a second. This is like taking all the witnesses to a crime and putting in the same room for a while. Do you think they might come out with the same story? Or worse still, taking the suspects, putting them all in a room together, and letting them talk freely and get it together. Do you think they might come up with a similar story? Morons. In cases where the dissociative symptoms were ignored, the coercive treatment approach ceased, and the patients were removed from dedicated wards. Allegations of satanic rape and abuse normally ceased. Recovered memories were identified as fabrications, and conventional treatments for presenting symptoms were generally successful. So the Satanic Panic was a modern manifestation of mass hysteria not unlike the witch trials centuries before, in which people were swept up in fear and paranoia, and not unlike the witch trials, there were roots of religious fundamentalism that were at the heart of the Satanic Panic. Now, I know you've all heard of the witch trials. Estimates as to how many women, primarily women, but by no measure exclusively, lots of men too, for not confessing, for being married to a witch, for not identifying other witches, as to how many were killed, numbers vary so widely, but it's quite probably in the millions. And we like to think of ourselves in this day and age, in this modern so-called enlightened time, that nothing like this could ever happen again. Nothing like a witch trial. No. Ridiculous. Well, it happened less than 50 years ago. And in fact, it's still with us today. You may have heard people on the right in the U.S., the extreme right, the paranoid, freaked out conspiracy theory right, like QAnon and so forth, talking about how there's some insidious cabal of, pedophiles out there amongst the great elite and, the great wealthy. Well, maybe there is. Maybe there is. It's kind of ironic that the leader of the United States and, champion of all things extreme right has been, in my opinion, rightly accused and even charged with pedophilia and rape, but they don't look at him as part of the problem. But it's still with us. My point is, don't believe that because something happened 500 years ago or 400 years ago, that it can't happen again. Mass hysteria is a thing. Mass panic is a thing. Moral panic is a thing. And it doesn't take very much to incentivize that kind of thinking. Let's hope it never happens. Because while no one here in this satanic ritual abuse case, freakout, was executed, careers were ruined, reputations were ruined, lives were ruined. I think that's awful. I think that's more than enough for a bunch of people who absolutely got wrapped up in paranoia, fear, and fundamentalist hatred. Because that's all this was. When you see things, when you hear a conspiracy theory, and God knows social media and even to some extent the news, YouTube is rife with lies. By no means all of it. And it can be hard to glean what is correct and what is false, what is true and what is lies. Use logic. Use your common sense. Don't just listen to other people because they say it or because somebody you really respect says it. If it doesn't sit well with you, go with that. And do your research. Again, YouTube is not research. Sorry. Nothing wrong with YouTube. Entertaining as hell. Wikipedia, I have no problem with Wikipedia. Even when I was a teacher, if my students used Wikipedia, I had no problem with that. If they were high school students, they weren't only allowed to use Wikipedia, but it's a good jumping on point for a lot of stuff. You can get a lot of good information, and what's more, if it is a well-written article, which they often are, there will be lots of citations at the bottom for you to go down all the rabbit holes you want. But know your stuff. Don't take something just at face value because. Especially when it's something like this that can devastate or destroy people, even societies. Key word here. Again, research. Do it. Do it, damn it. All right. So that was a long one. I get it. But I'm going to give you a couple more stories. This next one here is very short. And the last one is nothing as long as the first one, because I don't think I've ever done that long a story before. This one is a bit alarming. No one dies, so that's awesome. But let's get into... Well, we all know about AI, right? We all know about it. Has some good points, has some terrible points, and the future, I don't know, dude. I don't know. I'm not sure. I'm going to leave that one for another matter, but let's get into this here. So Canadian officials are investigating how an innocent man spent 18 months in prison after police confused his Skyrim-inspired username with a nearly identical account. Brandon Clamy was acquitted of all charges on July 23rd, just this past month, after the Nova Scotia Court of Appeal found that he was factually innocent and should never have been charged or convicted. Nova Scotia Attorney General Scott Armstrong has now requested a detailed briefing from the province's public prosecution services and vowed to prevent a similar case from happening again. Quote, "I'm very concerned about this. I'm not sure how something like this can happen within the system," Armstrong said. "I've asked the Public Prosecution Service to give me a specific briefing on all the steps in this case And once I have that, I want to make some decisions of what the next steps will be. The case began with an investigation into messages sent to a 12-year-old girl in Wisconsin through the Kik messaging app. The suspect used the name FUS_RO_DAH, a reference to the iconic dragon shout from the Elder Scrolls V Skyrim. I have no friggin' idea what that is, but I presume it's a game, so yeah. However, Wisconsin police requested information for FUS_1_RO_DAH, which had one fewer underscores and belonged to the Nova Scotia man. That account led investigators to claim his email address and IP address in Nova Scotia. Halifax Regional Police later searched his home and seized phones and laptops, but found no evidence connecting him to the girl, the messages, or the images involved in the case. Claim he was still convicted of 3 charges in April 2023. He received an 18-month prison sentence in January 2024 and served the entire term. I'd be suing their dicks off. You better believe it, dude. Including the idiot in Wisconsin who's clearly illiterate. Moron. The appeal court said the correct username would likely have led investigators to someone in California. It also found that the discrepancy was available during Claimy's original trial, but somehow went unnoticed. CBC reported that Armstrong plans to examine how the error passed through police, prosecutors, defense lawyers, and the court. Armstrong has not ruled out a public inquiry and said the province is willing to meet with Claim or his representatives. According to the Canadian press, there have not yet been discussions about potential compensation. Claimy isn't the only innocent man to be incorrectly arrested. Earlier this year, a man announced he was suing the city of Reno, Nevada, after he was misidentified by AI and wrongfully arrested at the Peppermill Casino. Yeah, man. Yeah. Like, can you not tell the difference between 2 underscores and 1? If this was human error, it's bullshit. If it's AI error, it's bigger bullshit because you shouldn't be using it then. God. I'm all for technology. I really am. I get sick of people who poo-poo technology. But make sure it works, especially in a case like this. This dude lost a year and a half of his life, plus whatever it cost him to fight the charges and lose, plus the criminal record, plus his reputation, plus word on the street about it. And this is not like he got a parking ticket. This is talking to an underage girl, for God's sakes. Is the press going to put it on the same front page that he's been found innocent as they did for when he was found guilty? I guarantee you not. Nobody likes good news, certainly not the media. That felt good. All right, so let's get on to the final story of this episode. It's been a long episode, eh? That first story was friggin' exhausting. But I do believe it needed being told. So we're going to go back a long way in time. Well, not that long way in time, but a fair ways. None of you were alive, probably. You would be 98 years old if you were alive at the time of this story, so I guess it's doable. So going back to March 10th, 1928, when Christine Collins gave her 9-year-old son Walter a dime so he could go see a movie. Those are the days, eh? But sadly, Walter didn't come back home. Over the next 5 months, Christine desperately waited for news about her missing son. And that summer, when police announced that they'd found him, she thought that her terrible nightmare was finally over. In fact, it was just beginning. When Christine went to pick up her son, she was shocked to find a strange boy waiting for her. But the police insisted that the child was Walter, and when Christine insisted that it was not, they began to turn against her. The Los Angeles police accused Christine of being a bad mother and a difficult woman, and had her forcibly committed to a mental hospital. Yeah, who is she to say who her son is? Obviously, the police know better. They've never met him. What can she know, silly woman? Jesus, that's not even incompetence. I got to think about a word with that. It's negligence at one. It's vicious. Before Walter Collins vanished, Christine Collins lived a quiet life in the Mount Washington neighborhood of Los Angeles. She was raising her son alone. Her ex-husband was in jail, and she worked at a telephone company. But on March 10th, 1928, 9-year-old Walter vanished. As the Los Angeles Times reports, the police conducted a massive manhunt for Walter. They dredged a local lake, collected tips, and launched a national campaign to find the missing boy. But Walter remained missing. Then, that August, a boy claiming to be Walter emerged in Illinois. As the Los Angeles Times reports, Christine Collins paid his $70 in travel fare and eagerly waited to welcome her son home. But when the boy arrived, Christine felt that something was very wrong. Quote, "I do not think that is my son," she said. Despite her hesitation, the Los Angeles police urged Christine Collins to take the boy home. They were under enormous pressure and wanted to close the case. They purportedly told Christine to, quote, "try the boy out." Overwhelmed and emotionally exhausted, Christine agreed. But as the days passed, she became more convinced than ever that the boy was not her son, Walter. After 3 weeks, she went to the police and told them so. With Walter's dental records and the testimony of her friends, Christine confronted the police and insisted that the boy they had given her was not Walter. But Police Captain J.J. Jones refused to hear it. I already hate him. "What are you trying to do, make fools out of us all?" he allegedly exclaimed. "Or are you trying to shirk your duty as a mother and have the state provide for your son? You are the most cruel-hearted woman I've ever known." Oh, where's his grave? I gotta pee. But Christine Collins refused to back down. Right on. As she later testified, Jones then told her, "You're insane and ought to be in a madhouse. You're under arrest and I'm going to send you to the psychopathic ward." Sure enough, the police had Christine forcibly committed to the Los Angeles County General Hospital's psychiatric ward under Code 12 internment, meant for someone who is deemed difficult or an inconvenience. Jesus, if that's still a thing, I got a list of people. During the 5 days that Christine Collins was in the psychiatric ward, the boy who claimed to be Walter Collins admitted that he had lied. He was not Walter. His name was actually Arthur Hutchins. As Hutchins confessed, he was 12 years old and from Iowa. After his mother died, he had run away from home to get away from his father and stepmother, hitchhiking and working odd jobs to survive. While at a cafe in Illinois, a fellow diner told him how much he looked like Walter Collins, whose image had appeared in newspapers across the country. Hutchins, primarily motivated by the idea of moving to Hollywood and meeting his favorite actor, Tom Mix, decided to impersonate the missing boy. Christine Collins was subsequently released from the hospital, and she sued the city and the Los Angeles police for false imprisonment. Though it took 2 years and 2 trials, a judge ultimately ordered that J.J. Jones, the cop at the center of this, pay Christine $10,800. Claiming to be perpetually broke, Jones never paid. Shocking. Not even a little. Meanwhile, the search for Walter Collins continued, and when the police discovered a serial killer, Gordon Stewart Northcott, who had been murdering young boys, they suggested that he'd killed Walter as well. In September 1928, Gordon Northcott was arrested while trying to flee to Canada. He was ultimately found guilty of kidnapping, molesting, and murdering 3 boys in the so-called Wineville chicken coop murders. However, he could have had as many as 20 victims. The true number of children Gordon Northcott sexually abused and murdered is still unknown. However, Christine Collins was never sure if Walter had been one of them. She certainly had reason to distrust the police, and since neither Walter's body nor his clothing or possessions were ever found at Northcott's infamous ranch in Wineville, now called Myraloma, Christine had reason to believe that Walter was still alive. As the Los Angeles Times reports, Christine even received permission to visit Northcott before he was executed. Northcott had hinted that he would tell her the truth and provide closure, but when she arrived at the prison, the serial killer refused to reveal anything at all. "I don't want to see you," he said when she arrived. "I don't know anything about it. I'm innocent." Yeah, of course you are. Though most believe that Walter was, in fact, one of Northcott's victims, one of the other boys Northcott was accused of killing later turned up alive. This gave Christine Collins a shred of hope about Walter, too. She clung on to it for the rest of her life, hoping that Walter Collins would reappear. Sadly, by the time she died in 1964, just before her 76th birthday, her son remained missing. I went off on Bad Cops last week. Not that I have any problem with doing it again, but how is that even defensible? They had no garnishing of wages last time, no seizure of assets. Christ, cops do it to criminals all the time. Above the law. Above the law. Anyway, that is the end of our episode, and that was a long one. That's got to be our longest one ever by a long shot. I'm starving, and I'm not going anywhere. So yeah, it's time to eat. Anyway, I do hope you enjoyed the show. I know it was long. I hope you liked it nonetheless. I hope you found it informative, thought-provoking, maybe even a little anger-inspiring at times. Anger's good. Gets the blood flowing. Good for the cardiovascular. Anyway, as usual, if you're listening to whatever platform you're listening to us on, Spotify, YouTube, Amazon. No, it is no Amazon anymore. Apple Podcasts. Please give us a 5-star rating, and if you have a moment, give us a review. Remember to follow us on our socials, Facebook, Instagram, Threads, occasionally TikTok, but it largely sucks. And if you have any story suggestions or have any feedback you'd like to offer, by all means, send us a DM on any of the aforementioned platforms. And story suggestions we love. We love. And we love you. I do anyway. Noah probably does too. Anyway, until next week, do take good care of yourselves and one another, please. Auf Wiedersehen.
The Absurd Podcast is written, produced, and recorded by Rod and Mal. Music by Audionautics.com.